So, Kaya, Wanju, good afternoon and welcome everyone that's joining us today. Thank you for joining this session with the Piddington Society. Tonight we're going to be looking at careers in human rights and in the community legal sector for new lawyers. But before we continue, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional custodian of the lands on which we're all sitting tonight and connecting through technology with each other. And so that's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So my name is Natasha Jones and I'm the Deputy Director of Piddington PLT. I'm also a senior lawyer. I've been in the profession for about 20 years now and worked in a variety of places. And I definitely was someone who 20 years ago, when I was looking at what I wanted to do for a career, I knew I wasn't in law for the money, the prestige, the reputation, any of those things, but it was something where I wanted to find meaning, find purpose, help people, feel like I was making a difference. And it didn't seem at the time when I was going through law school that there were a lot of options out there, and that's probably may seem the same way now, 20 years down the track. But there are options, and you're going to hear from some people tonight who will be able to share, what their career stories have been and the sort of work and contribution that they've been making. So basically, I'll just introduce them. Tonight, we're hearing from three people who are using their legal skills to work on human rights and social issues. So we've got Gemma Mitchell from Legal Aid, Jacob Higgins from the Aboriginal Legal Service, and Charlotte Solomon from RUA. So we'll have a bit of time with each of them today, and there'll be breakout rooms that are already later, so you can ask some, particular questions one-on-one with people. And those breakout rooms are going to be led by our Piddington advocates at UWA, Darcy Smith and Hannah Young, and also myself. While we're here, I should just mention that Piddington PLT is currently taking applications for our cohort for next year. So if you're interested in joining a like-minded group of people, we're all about advancing access to justice, about collegiality in the profession, as well as giving everyone these great opportunities like we have tonight to connect with senior and emerging lawyers. Then I'd ask that you check out the details on our website. But now I'll just briefly introduce our first speaker, who's going to be Gemma. So Gemma is the head of civil law for Legal Aid. Before this, she was the principal solicitor for the Consumer Credit Legal Service and was engaged heavily in the Banking Royal Commission. So, Gemma, interested to know when you were at uni, what sort of lawyer you were aspiring to be, and how did you find your way into doing human rights type lawyering in Western Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Tash, and hi, everyone. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm sitting on today. So that's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I got into law because I did actually have some work experience as a lawyer, in a legal department. It was at Thames Water in the UK, which is the equivalent of the Water Corporation here. I'd originally done my first degree in psychology back in the UK, and I'd always had a bit of a drive to want to help people and work with people. And hadn't had any experience with law or with lawyers, or I was the first person in my family to go to university. So originally I had no interest in studying law when I was actually at university the first time round. I came out here as a backpacker, absolutely loved it, and on my return to the UK, ended up with this job at Thames Water. And it was in the litigation department where they were suing people that hadn't paid their bills. So quite different to the sort of social justice lawyer and the space that I'm in now. But I just found the work so interesting. I'd love learning so much, worked in a great team. And when I spoke to the lawyers that I was working with, one of them gave me some really good advice, and that was to get as much work experience as a law student and a law graduate and junior practitioner as I could, to try out all the different types of law and different workplaces that I could before I sort of came off of that restricted practitioner practicing certificate, and that always stayed with me throughout my sort of law studies and as an RP. So I really tried my best to do that. I knew from the work that I was doing at Thames Water, what I was interested in was the civil law. It didn't interest me to go into family or crime. So throughout university, I ended up coming over to Australia to study law here at Notre Dame. I did have an idea in my head that I wanted to practice in civil law, but really didn't know what type of firm I wanted to work for, the size of the firm. Did I want to work in-house like I was at Thames Water, or even what other opportunities there were available? And I found that at Notre Dame, there was a really strong social justice theme throughout the whole of the studies. And I think it's well known for providing students with that strong sense of ethics and social justice. So that really piqued my interest, and that sort of, linked back to why I'd got into psych as well, was that connection to sort of helping people and wanting to use law to really assist people and empower them and work one-on-one with people. And I think another sort of aspect, I guess, of studying at Notre Dame was just, I hadn't realized at the time of being a law student just how important it is to make those connections at uni, and not just with your students, your cohort that you're studying with. Actually, not long after uni, you're going to be on panels like this, presenting with people that were actually teaching you. So making those connections with your lecturers and your tutors as well, because time flies so quickly, and that gap between being a student, studying, graduating, and then being a practitioner is really, really small. So I think throughout that sort of studies at Notre Dame, it did come to me that I did want to work in social justice, but like Tash said, there's just not a lot of options out there. And when you're applying for clerkships and offers and getting rejections, which I got many of, it was a case of me taking what I could get really when I graduated from uni, and took a job with a sole practitioner working 1 day a week, and from that then working full-time once I had graduated, but found that this work that I was doing, even though the law was what I wanted to do, the civil law, it still wasn't ticking that social justice box for me. So I did look for other things whilst I was practicing. So I had started to volunteer 1 day a week at Case for Refugees, which was a community legal centre working with asylum seekers and refugees, and that was on Saturday mornings. And I also joined the Human Rights and Social Justice Working Group of the Law Society's Young Lawyers Committee, and that was working on submissions on human rights issues. So I found that was getting, through doing that, I was able then to sort of fulfill what I wanted to get out of practicing in that social justice side. But the sort of need to do that got stronger and stronger, to the point where I did come to the realization that I wanted to give up my commercial law job and try and find a job in social justice.
Sorry, I was just unmuting myself there. Yeah, I think that's super interesting, is that it can sometimes take a while to sort of work out exactly where your place is in the profession. And also it's that case of just keep trying, persevering, even if you don't find what sort of aligns with your beliefs and your values at the beginning, then there's always going to be, other options out there. And I think, what's really important is making those connections with other people in the profession. And from that, you're going to find out about, things that they're doing, and that can sort of spark your own, interests and stuff like that. So, yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, just taking, looking at things as an opportunity as well. So it might not be, your top option that you get, but what else, can you get out of this opportunity, and what can I learn from it? It's a continuous learning process.
Yeah, definitely. I think always the day you're not learning anything more is probably the day that, you need to think about moving on somewhere else. Yeah. So thank you for that, Gemma. Move to our next speaker, Jacob. So Jacob's a solicitor in the Civil and Human Rights team at ALS. And amongst other things, I understand he spends a fair bit of time on issues relating to children in detention. So Jacob, can you tell us how you landed your position at ALS, and what sort of matters do you get to work on?
Sure. I think the story of my lived career so far has been a lot of luck, to be honest. I started studying law and journalism at Curtin straight after high school. I had just kind of decided that I like the idea of justice and I like the idea of writing and arguing. So that was probably the extent of the thought I gave to studying, to be honest. It was actually through my journalism studies that I sort of discovered a little bit, at the very least, or started me on the journey kind of, that I wanted to work for Aboriginal people. It was during journalism, had the opportunity to go through a couple of units run by the elder in residence there, Simon Forrest, called Noongar Culture and Identity. And we got to go around and travel down south, southwest, and learn about the cultures down there and the people down there. Stay on country, learn from elders. It was an incredible experience, and one that I actually repeated a couple of times, and probably a few more times than I was allowed to technically. And yeah, I just kind of discovered through that, working there, that I wanted to work for Aboriginal people. And then as a journalist, student journalist, got an opportunity to work with the First Nations Deaths in Custody Watch Committee in 2016, which was it was the 25th anniversary of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. And it was actually during the time of the inquest into the death of Miss Dew. And I discovered later that my current boss had appeared appeared for the family in that inquest that I was sitting in the media section for, and working with the family on as well. So yeah, I mean, after journalism, the way Curtin double degrees work, or at least for me, was that you do kind of half and half for a couple of years, then you finish off one and then finish off the other. So I finished off journalism first, kind of lost contact a little bit with the Aboriginal community more so, and got stuck into some quite deep law work, obviously, and then had a bit of a crisis of the soul a little bit at the end, when I realized that I really didn't want to do anything related to corporate law, that I really wanted to work for community members, Aboriginal people, and just people who have vulnerable people, basically. And so kind of decided, after a bit of stress, not to apply for any clerkships, and just applied to volunteer at basically any community legal centre that I could find, or that was accepting volunteers. And kind of lucked out. I got involved with the Fremantle Community Legal Centre and the Environmental Defenders Office, actually. Quite different work, and especially different work to what I do now. And then applied for I think it's called the Aurora Foundation. They do basically like an internship program for Aboriginal community controlled organisations and some government departments across a lot of different disciplines, including law, and just lucky enough that I got a spot here. And that's actually how I met Charlotte, who was an intern at the same time as me. And then I got that in January of 2020, which is the year I graduated, and just managed to stay on as a volunteer through COVID, which was an interesting challenge. And eventually they figured out that they wanted to keep me and found some money for me, and now I'm a lawyer.
So what does a typical day look like for you? What sort of things might you be working on?
So a couple of different things. the theory a little bit behind what the civil team does is we try and do work that obviously is valuable and affects Aboriginal people, but isn't necessarily covered by many other community legal centres or other legal firms generally. So the main work that we do is police complaints and claims. Similarly, prison complaints and claims, that tends to be a lot of, torts of battery, negligence, false imprisonment, that kind of thing. Another big part of what we do is racial discrimination complaints, which can be, it's quite a different and almost non-legal process in some of those cases. I mean, obviously we have the Equal Opportunity Act, and that's where a lot of this comes from, but a lot of it is actual like conciliation work and that kind of thing, and negotiation, as opposed to just a cut and dry legal case or claim. And another of the probably major areas that we deal with is coronial matters, so inquests into people who have passed away in custody, and some of the investigation aspect of that too. So yeah, a typical day could involve any of those, and then we also have a fairly hectic duty day that we decide basically have a lawyer on call for anyone who calls in, to deal with basically any sort of legal issue that doesn't fit neatly into criminal or family. And yeah, I should say, you mentioned earlier, a lot of our work is focused on at the moment, youth in detention, specifically Banksia.
Yeah, and that's super interesting space at the moment in terms of what's been going on there. Are you also doing stuff in relation to raising age of criminal responsibility as well?
Yeah, I should say, part of the role and part of the team's work is a lot of sort of non-legal advocacy, or obviously advocacy related to legal things like the age of criminal responsibility. Yeah, so we've got a few campaigns going on at the moment. We're involved in the Raise the Age campaign. That's the big one at the moment, but also helping out basically anywhere else we can, doing a bit at the moment on trying to campaign for a Human Rights Act for WA, which is only sort of recently just been, the campaign itself has only recently been launched. But a lot of the work, to be honest, is trying to advocate for change outside of just putting in legal claims.
Which is great. It's really about trying to be, I guess, a bit proactive rather than just reacting to someone's arriving with a legal problem and just trying to assist, one person through that. It's really trying to look at those bigger issues, systemic change, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the goal.
Right, awesome. Thanks, Jacob. So turn to Charlotte now. So after a career in the public service, Charlotte changed to law. She's now working on a range of issues at Rural Legal Services, primarily care and protection, domestic and family violence matters. I understand, Charlotte, you started your career as a family lawyer, so interested to know how you found your way into what you're working on now and what the differences are. And for people, who might be coming to law later in life, what sort of advice do you have for people who want to make a career change and they're interested in working in the human rights space?
Okay, well, yes, I did come late to law. I worked for federal government for a period of time and then transitioned across to state. I realised I wanted to contribute more to community than what I was doing in my current capacity, so I decided to go back to study. Took full advantage of university. I really enjoyed it. I studied at Murdoch and graduated in 2020. I actually undertook a program which saw us do a study tour in Geneva, and that was a human rights law. One of the projects that I had to work on was an assignment on the stolen generation, and it made me realise that human rights is everywhere. It's as important as grassroots, making sure that someone has a roof over their head, making sure that children have the right to, well, all sorts of things really, but the right to have a childhood and be raised in a safe, loving environment. I did my Piddingtons last year, 2021, so I was admitted in November. I did start in family law, and I came across that as a result of volunteering. So one big thing I'd say to anybody wanting wanting some direction or an idea of where they want to go, is volunteer far and wide. Do what you can, take the opportunities that are made available to you. They may not be something that you would probably think at first flush would be interesting, but you may meet someone or you may find something in that space that's piques your interest, and you flow on from there. I started off volunteering at Fremantle Community Legal Centre, and that really consolidated my interest in family law, but more so child-related matters. I found that quite interesting, and I started to understand the importance of everything being focused on the child's best interests. I also came to work in the family domestic violence space under the guidance of a solicitor there who was supported by Fremantle Council for that specific role. I then started working at Subiaco Justice, so I was doing an evening a week there alongside Fremantle, alongside my paid position. Most of the issues there were quite simple. I actually realised that the issue that ordinary people face, so everyone, is lack of education. So a lack of awareness of what their rights and responsibilities are. And often it was a nudge in the right direction, or just some guidance so that somebody could understand what it was that they were supposed to do, or what it was they were supposed to not do, really. I met a pragmatic lawyer volunteering there whose method of delivering advice I really liked, and we stayed in touch, and he then offered me a position working alongside him in the family law space. His professional partner, was a independent children's lawyer and a child representative in the children's court, and it really sang to me. As that firm grew, I realised it was going in a different direction to the interest that I was aligned with, and that was the child-related matters. So I, after admission, applied for a role with RUA. RUA started off their care and protection service around, actually it'd be about 2 years now, September 2020. And what they promote is a specialist wraparound service. So there's a solicitor, and aligned with the solicitor is a specialist mental health community worker or social worker. We are aligned with a client, and we stay with that client from the start of their service right through to the end. It just means that a person who comes to our service is often either has a mental illness, is suffering quite significant trauma, a plethora of issues really, but it means that they're not being re-traumatized and being told to retell their story. So from that in that respect, we're sort of able to provide that wraparound service that we're very proud of. Yeah, I guess advice I'd have to prospective students would be that you really, studying law as opposed to practicing law are two very separate things. I was really happy doing it through Piddington's in that you got a lot of practical opportunities. It also helped me clarify that I went through a rough patch where I thought this might not be for me, but it helped me identify the issues between what it was I wanted to do and what it was that I didn't want to do. And I realised that I still really enjoyed working with people. I'm still very passionate about social justice, but I just needed to follow a different path. So I have sort of stayed in that family law space, but the care and protection and family violence are sort of a separate and sort of more specialised area, and I've been really happy to be able to work with RUA in that space.
Yeah, so we heard a bit earlier from Jacob about the work ALS does with children involved in the justice system. So I'm interested, Charlotte, about what your sort of thoughts are about how children are looked after, when there's some involvement in the justice system.
Ooh, I mean, it's it can be very multifaceted, I think, and obviously I worked with Jacob for a period of time in the civil and human rights section, and the managing lawyer there, Alice Barter, is very driven in the rights of children. I think again it boils down to a lack of understanding, and that understanding might be cultural. It might be understanding that what one person considers a family may not seem the same to another person. It could boil down to something as simple as having a case manager in department or another affiliated worker who's burnt out and is running at capacity. It could be the simple fact that nobody's listening to what the child wants. Something as simple as, well, what is it that you actually want? Taking that into account, how do we best support you to return to a supportive environment where mum and dad or whoever the parents are in whatever fashion they are? How do we support that family unit to continue? It can be difficult, and sometimes the approach between agencies, hospitals, medical services, support services department, even someone like rural or ALS, we may have different approaches and different beliefs, but it's being able to find what works and putting those pieces of the puzzle together, I think.
Yeah, and I think I always found, because I spent a lot of years at Legal Aid working as a criminal defence lawyer, but I always found it, although you're working as a lawyer and you needed your legal skills, you also seem to, wear a lot of different hats in terms of being, trying to provide that more holistic service to your clients, trying to assist them with what the particular legal problem is, but then trying to link them in to get help and support with, other things that are obviously going on in their life, which is what's having the impact on them ending up, involved in the justice system, and trying not to just sort out that one problem, but trying to maybe help them, get into a position where maybe they're not going to be brushing up against the justice system again, or as much in the future. What would you say? Actually, I asked this question of all three of you. What does justice mean to you? If we start with you, Gemma.
That's a big question, isn't it? Okay. So I guess justice, I mean, okay, let's start with access to justice then. So there's an access to justice issue. I think it's getting people the outcome that they, not necessarily that they want, but that's best for them, that they're empowered to make that decision to get that best outcome. I suppose, yeah, it is really like an interpretation of the word. Sorry, I'm waffling a bit. So look, I guess probably what I can do then is just relate it back to an example, because it is such a big question. I think.
Yes, sorry. Without notice as well.
Look, I think what we do in the community legal sector, we provide free legal advice and free legal assistance. So that overcomes the accessibility barrier. I've always felt that something like legal advice and legal assistance is just as important to people to be able to provide them with free advice and assistance as it is, say, going to a doctor and going to a GP and getting health and medical advice, because it's so important to people's well-being and their health and their ability to live their lives as fully as they can be. I went to a presentation once and I can't remember who said it, but I remember a lawyer when I was a junior practitioner saying that as lawyers, we are custodians of all this information and all of this information about processes and how to get things done and the way that the world works, that it's really a duty and an obligation on us to be able to then share that with other people and to, help them through their journey through life. I think, like you said, Tasha, when you were introducing me, my background when I left private practice, I then started at Consumer Credit Legal Service. So that's the community legal centre that specialises in banking and finance. And through that, we did do a huge amount of work on the Banking Royal Commission, to the point where we were making submissions. We were hooked on watching all the Commission hearings. We were finding that what was being raised at the Royal Commission were the cases that we were seeing coming through our door. So we were really excited when I got an invite from the Banking Royal Commission to go to the stakeholder lockup when they released the final report. So I was part of the stakeholder group that got a copy of it 3 hours before it was released to the public. So it meant that I could go through it all, look at the recommendations, pick out some key points, draft a media release and have that ready to go as I stepped out, because we had to hand in our phones and put our laptops on flight mode and things like that whilst we're in this stakeholder lockup. And to read some of the recommendations, and one of them did cite our submission and agreed with a recommendation that our tiny little organisation in Perth had made out of 10,000 submissions. It was really exciting to see that the work that we saw come through our doors every day, and the issues that that people were coming to us with had been picked up by the Royal Commission, to the point where a recommendation had been made about particular conduct and particular laws to do with banking and finance. So yeah, that's justice in a nutshell, I think.
Awesome. And it is so amazing when you get that tangible, sense of what I'm doing here is actually making a difference. It's so rewarding to have that. Jacob, you've had a bit more time to think about what justice means to you.
Yeah, I reiterate the thought that that's a huge question. I don't know how to answer fully. But the first word that comes to mind for me for justice and working here is reparation. And I don't think that's what the system is designed to give at the moment. To be honest, I can't really consider, I mean, obviously we call it the justice system. That's the system that we interact with the most, the criminal justice system. But the outcomes that it gets for particularly our clients, Aboriginal people, it's not justice. For kids, the majority of the kids in Banksia are Aboriginal kids. The conditions there, I have to be careful slightly because it's quite public for us, but yeah, the conditions there aren't just for the kids. They're not actually designed to achieve any sort of justice for the children or for their for whoever's suffered from their crime, or the property that suffered from their crime, for example. Yeah, but it's not how it stands at the moment. I think justice is really that pushing, similar to Gemma's experience with the Royal Commission, is pushing for that change and pushing for the people, the people's experience that you see every day, pushing that to be not only seen but understood and actually resolved in some way and reformed in some way, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think, to be honest, that's the best answer I've got at the moment.
Well, I think the thing is, it is such a huge question, and it means so many different things. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear, what it means for you in the context of, Aboriginal legal service and what you guys are trying to achieve over there. Charlotte, what about you? What would you like to add in terms of what justice means to you?
I guess justice for me, and in the space that I work in, would be lifting people's voices so that they're heard, and not just heard but respected. So being able to be given a space to say, this is the position I find myself in, these are the reasons for it, this is how I would like to see it resolved, and using justice, I suppose, or the legal system as a tool to help people improve their lives. So I guess, we're talking about human rights. Well, all of that falls under human rights, that, that right to self-determination, the ability to speak and be heard. I used to have a line that I would say, and I think I used it in my application with ALS, and it was empowerment through education. I think it's very important to empower a person. So in some respects, I consider myself a tool that the client can use in court, particularly in the children's court. We have a program there called Danju Bidiak. It's a pilot court program. It's a therapeutic court system, and it allows parents, rather than their solicitor, to speak and be heard. And I find that wonderful in terms of in terms of justice, really. A parent can actually say what it is that's concerning them. They can raise and discuss practical things that are affecting them, and it's quite collaborative, it's quite informal, it's still recorded, it's still a court, but I find that justice seems to work better in there than it would in, say, a cold courtroom, where a solicitor speaking on behalf of the client and the client doesn't have a voice. So that is how I perceive justice to be in the space I'm in.
Yeah, I could spend, you know, hours just chatting to all three of you about these sorts of things, but just mindful about the time, want to leave some room to go into our breakout rooms. So we'll end the formal part of the proceedings now.